So, I have a book review to share with all of you today, and I'm pretty sure it would not be inaccurate to say this is probably one of the most highly anticipated books in the nonprofit sector in 2018. The book I'm talking about is Unicorns Unite, which is maybe not a very good picture based on the light. But anyways, it's by Jessamine Shams Lau, Jane Liu, and Vu Lei. And I'm sure some of you may be familiar with Vu Lei's blog, Nonprofit AF, which is a fantastic resource. And if you've been reading it for any length of time, you probably already have a taste of what to expect in this book. So I received an advance copy of this from the publishers, and today I just wanted to share some of my takeaways from the book in case they help you, and also encourage you to purchase a copy because I really did think this was an amazing book and something that a lot of us could benefit from in the nonprofit sector. My name is Vanessa Fluxion, and I'm the president of the Storytelling Nonprofit, a consulting and training company that works with nonprofit organizations to help them tell stories that raise money and awareness. Now, before I started my consulting company, I was an in-house fundraiser for many years. In fact, I worked on grant applications at one point in my life, or I should say in my career. And I have a recollection of it being a very unpleasant process for myself and for all of those involved in it. It was sort of this mysterious, strange process to engage foundations in relationships. And I think so much of that is reflected in this book and in a lot of what Vu Lei has talked about over the years in terms of the, I don't know, sort of precarious and frustrating relationships that foundations experience with nonprofits and also that nonprofits experience with foundations. So this book is a collaboration between three really awesome people who bring some really interesting and very different perspectives to this particular conversation. And I really appreciated their diverse perspectives on the funder-fundee relationships. And I think that really shows throughout this book. So it's not just a book for nonprofit organizations, and it's not just a book for foundations. I think there's a lot that both of those audiences can take away from this book. The other thing I really valued is that I think this book contributes a really important piece to this ongoing conversation that's happening in our sector about foundation nonprofit relationships, and also the conversation around how do we evaluate and value a nonprofit organization's work and its impact. And I think that's been a real challenge for a lot of people to understand and to articulate to donors. There's a real movement in the sector to hopefully shift how donors and foundations understand this and value it and also evaluate it. And I think this book offers quite a bit of information and resources around how we can continue to shift that conversation towards something that's more equitable, something that's more fair, I think, as well. There's, I think, a lot of unfairness right now in how nonprofits are evaluated for their work in terms of overhead or line item budgets, things like that. There's so many other factors we can consider. And I have to say, personally, for me, one of the things I've thought a lot about in the last few years is just the equity and inclusion around funding that's available for nonprofits and for their founders as well. I'm really passionate and interested to see more foundations supporting organizations that are run by people of color, and organizations that are really working on issues that are important in the community that are not getting like high profile praise or coverage in terms of what they're working on. There's a lot of really important work happening, and not all of that is funded well. And I think that in this time of having these conversations, hopefully that can start to shift. And I think that's a really exciting possibility for a lot of organizations. So I wanted to share three of my takeaways from this book. The book is divided into three sections, and I have a takeaway from each of those that I thought I would share with you. So part one is called What It Is. Part two is called What It Could Be. And part three is called How to Get There. And so this is essentially describing the current landscape of foundation nonprofit relationships, what it currently is, what it could be, and how we can all make movement towards getting there a little faster, which is really great. The first takeaway I had was this idea that we need to have trust-based grant making. I thought this was really interesting. As I said, I've had my own experiences with foundations and being a nonprofit applying for foundation funding. And this idea that there needs to be a higher degree of trust in order to break down systems of power and sort of a hierarchy, I thought was really important. This idea of more, I don't know, not necessarily like a flat structure in terms of how nonprofits relate to foundations and vice versa, but just this greater sense of trust that we can all trust each other, And I actually wanted to read you an excerpt from it, which I will do. So this was an excerpt from page 39. So it says, quote, "There seems to be a pervasive lack of trust between funders and nonprofits, and it's affecting us and our ability to survive and do our work. The default relationship between funders and nonprofits is one of suspicion of the latter by the former, which leads to funders enacting policies, practices, and whatnot designed to make nonprofits accountable, such as restricting funding, individualizing applications, bespoke budget forms, customized reports, etc." So I'm sure some of you can probably relate to some of these things. They're the administrative things that all make us crazy in terms of working with foundations. And the idea is just that there are a lot of extra hoops for all of us to jump through because there's not enough trust in the relationships. And I think that's such an important point, and such a great thing to call out and talk about in this book. So my second takeaway after that was that things could be so much better than they currently are, and we should all be optimistic about that. And I have to say, if you do a lot of grant writing work or you do a lot of work with foundations right now, maybe you're thinking, I'm not feeling optimistic about it at all. And that's okay. I think they paint a couple of really interesting pictures about how things could change. And their framework for thinking about it is something called the EPIC Partnership Framework. And I'm going to show you this because hopefully you can see it. Oh, there we go. And I'll read these out. The whole book is beautifully illustrated as well. It's really great. So the idea is that EPIC is an acronym. It stands for E is equal value of all inputs. P is to prioritize needs. I is to increase trust and empathy. And C is to commit to bigger, bold, big, bold, and better. So I think that's a really interesting framework. And to me, thinking about that, it gave me hope that things will shift for foundations and nonprofits in the future, that maybe this really could be a turning point for all of us in terms of the type of grant making that happens and the type of relationships that we build between ourselves. So the last one that I wanted to share with you, and I'm just going to flip to my page here, is that the idea that both nonprofits and foundations have work to do. Like, what's suggested in this book is not just up to nonprofits to execute, and it's not just up to foundations to execute either. What I think is really valuable is that they lay out how both parties, both types of organizations can do things that are value positive and value add to improve the current state of things. And there's so many exercises and so many suggestions. That's what part 3 of the book is all about. And in fact, I actually think the last part is very much almost like a workbook. There's lots of activities, suggested things that organizations can do and evaluate in their internal environments to think about how we can dismantle a lot of this dysfunction that's currently happening. And I just thought that was so great to be able to lay that out really clearly. And maybe this really could be a roadmap for a lot of organizations who are interested in this conversation and who want to make some positive changes in grant making and in grant relationships as well. So I have to say, and I mentioned this earlier, one of the things that I do really enjoy about this book, I mean, of course, bar none, the content is fantastic and it's a really interesting read. It is really beautifully illustrated, and you can maybe tell just by the external cover here. There's lots of great illustrations throughout the book. It's just really beautiful to look at, really engaging. So I certainly appreciated that, but I also really appreciated that it's not just theory. It's also a workbook that really gives you opportunity to brainstorm and problem solve so that we can actually make some improvements in these areas of fundraising and funding, I should say. So if your organization is currently working with foundations, you feel like you're just banging your head against the wall with foundations and funders, I would encourage you to pick up a copy of this book. If nothing else, I think it might make you a little bit more optimistic about how things could be different and what you can do to positively start to contribute to that change. And if you're a foundation and you are interested in doing things differently and interested in thinking about what the next era of grant making and funding could look like, I would encourage you to pick up a copy of this as well. It will be a great read and I think a really interesting discussion for foundations and their boards and their staff to have around things that could change in their relationships with nonprofits. So that's my short and very quick review of this book. I hope you pick up a copy of it. As I said, I really enjoyed it, and I think it's going to be a really positive contribution to the nonprofit sector and hopefully catalyzes a lot of conversation and change for all of us. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get regular weekly content on nonprofit fundraising and communications. You can hit the button in the lower right-hand corner of this video.